Ezra chapter 2, and it's verse 64, that's right towards the end, verse 64, through to chapter 3, verse 1. Ezra chapter 2, verse 64 to 3, verse 1.
The whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337. And they had 200 men and women singers. Their horses were 736. Their mules were 245. Their camels were 435. And their donkeys 6,720. Some of the heads of the fathers' houses, when they came to the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, offered freely for the house of God to erect it in its place. According to their ability, they gave to the treasury for the work 61,000 gold drachmas, 5,000 minas of silver, and 100 priestly garments. So the priests and the Levites, some of the people, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the Nethinim, dwelt in their cities, and in Israel in their cities. And when the 7th month had come, and the children of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered together as one man to Jerusalem.
Thanks very much. The usual reading. So to recap for Glenda's benefit now. We do it each and every time, Glen, if there's a new face that's coming. But simply to say that with the story of Ezra, it's a story of a people that had been in a distant land called Babylon, away from their home some for 70 years, some family for 70 years, other families for around about 50 years. And they were there, they did well in Babylon. After the initial onset, the sorrow of losing everything, like Neil said, imagine losing your home, imagine losing your family, imagine losing everything. And it's all there in a barrow or on a donkey, and you're making your way down to Babylon, a place you don't even speak the same language, and you're there as slaves. Some of them will be prisoners, some of them will be executed. But as time went on, God brought them into favor in the city of Babylon and in the province as well. And so we find that they prospered, and some of the great men and women of those days prospered in the land of Babylon. Daniel became prime minister. But a day came that God had promised them that they would be able to return back to their home. The mercies of God, see. Now this is the story of a people that are going back, volunteering. They're not being pushed, they're not, you see the Dad's army when he asked for volunteers, everyone stepped back a step, and poor old Pikey was left standing in the front, or Jonesy, I can't remember, that type of thing. It was nothing forced like it, it was just sheer voluntary when hearts were awakened. And so God did a great work in Ezra chapter 1. We're told that the great king, Cyrus, king of Persia, his heart had been awakened to see that there was a God in heaven, and that this God was commanding him to rebuild the temple that was there in Jerusalem. Well, he had no building ideas, and so he turned to the people that Jerusalem belonged to, the people of Judah and Benjamin. And so a group of people, they too, well, I say a group of people, I think possibly thousands were awakened, above and beyond the 49,000 that actually went back home. I think thousands were stirred. The language certainly of chapter 1 seems to infer that. And then a day came when you make a decision. Shall I stay or shall I go? And there were hearts that said, no, I'm not going. Other hearts that said, I am going. Now Ezra, amazingly, when you think of the Exodus in the days of Moses, that he went into detail about the journey back, the places they went to, the people they met, the situations they were confronted with. But Ezra tells nothing of it. And so we have to look outside of Ezra. And I mentioned 2 verses for those that we heard on Sunday night. 2 verses that tell us something about the character of these people, the nature that began to show themselves. Isaiah says that one thing, that when you come out, you won't come out with haste. There will be a great sense of calm. There'll be no need to look over your shoulder. Sometimes, isn't it, I told you about my mate Yorkshire Terrier. He had a Staffordshire bull that was as thick as two short planks, that was pigeon-toed, and all these different things. And then he had this Yorkshire Terrier, Pip, and I was terrified of her. She was as nasty as they come, like. She'd sit on the back of the settee, and you go to move to get her, and she'd nip you in the neck. Always looking over your shoulder. The Lord said, no, you shall not come out by haste. There will be a measure of calm resting upon you. And then he goes on to say this, for the Lord shall go before you. That's lovely, isn't it? And the Lord shall be your rear guard. I said last week, the temptation overcome me, because I thought he's watching your back. Well, he does watch your back, but it doesn't mean that. It means that the Lord God of Israel shall gather you together, shall gather you up. As well as first, there will be a great sense of peace. There's no looking over the shoulder, no need to rush you. There's a great sense of assurance. The Lord's going before, and the Lord is coming behind. Great sense of assurance. But then we hear a little bit more in the Psalms. Not all the Psalms were written by David, and it's clear that the one particular Psalm was written by someone who was in this group of 49,000 people. Had to be in there for him to talk of it. Because he said this in Psalm 126, when the Lord brought back the captivity again to Zion, we were like them a dream. We could not believe it. We were like them the dream. Our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with joyful singing. Another one, written in the Psalms, became a #1 hit in the 1970s, I think. Psalm 137. And this is what Psalm 137 said. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down. Yes, we went when we remembered Zion. And later in the song, it says that the people of Babylon asked them to sing one of the songs of Zion. And they returned with a reply and said, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? For decades, they'd lost the ability to sing. They felt they had nothing to sing about. Nothing at all. But now coming through the gates of Babylon, entering out onto the plains that leads towards Judah, we find them singing. We were like them in a dream. Our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with joyful singing. What a change. So we're not told about the places and the situations they're in, but we're told about them with great peace, with great assurance, with great joy. These are some of the things, the traits that follow the Christian. That follows the person that's been awakened. They were awakened, they were stirred. And these attributes began to be their portion. Joy and peace and assurance, confidence that God was in the midst of it all. So that's the opening. Let's have a look at some of those, the journey. Chapter 2, verse 2, briefly tells us at the end of the verse, it says there, those returning to Jerusalem came with Zerubbabel. And then it lists that list of 10 names. Remember Andrew read it last week, and even he had difficulty with some of the names, and some of them are really funny names. You're thinking, why would you give me that name, man? You know, why would you do it? Why would you give me that? Realiah. Who's he? He's Realiah. It's unbelievable, some of the names that they had. But they had meanings, and names meant more in those days. Not just attractiveness, but they had meanings in their names. But it's interesting, isn't it? 10 plus Zerubbabel, 11. Now the thing is, Zerubbabel on this list of 10 is also recorded in the book of Nehemiah. He records exactly the same list, but he adds a 12th name. Now his name, we call him Nehemiah. It's a lovely sounding name, isn't it? Nehemiah. He's recorded in chapter 7 of Nehemiah. And so we don't have 11 going with, or we don't have 10 going with Zerubbabel as leaders, but we have 11. 11 and 1 is 12. Now when you first read Ezra, the first time you read it, you think it's a very limiting book. you think it's only fitting for a certain group of people, especially to the people of Judah and Benjamin, and possibly the Levites, because they are the ones that get, the 3 tribes that get mentioned. But as you begin to go, perhaps read it a second time, or even a third time, you begin to see that the margins are far, far wider. That there's a great measure of diversity in this group that is going back. Granted, nearly 50,000 strong is a fair crack of people, but in comparison to the population that was staying behind, minimal. But there's a diversity here. And then verse 2 ends with this type of phrase. Notice how it ends. It says this. I bet you I haven't written it down. No, I haven't. But why didn't I do that? Never mind. There we go, I got it here. That's it. This is how the verse ends. These are the number of the men of the people of Israel. And when you come into chapter 2 and come into chapter 3, you realize that Judah is just the provincial name. It's not the people that they're talking about. When it talks about the people, it talks about Israel. I think chapter 2 suggests that these are the tribal leaders of the 12 tribes, the heads of the families there. And so this group of people now is not a limited group. It's a group that opens up. And so we see here that it's an inclusiveness, exactly the same in the New Testament, in the Gospels. It's not about keeping people out, it's about bringing people in. Jesus said, never mind about trying to go out into the highways and byways, he said. And so it's a very inclusive gospel. The whosoever will. That's the title of the sermon tonight. So, Beth and I'm going to text me about 11 o'clock tonight. What's the title? So you can record it. 11 o'clock, you'll be fast asleep then. But whosoever will. And so we see this, a beautiful, beautiful picture. So very often we think that Christianity is so narrow and limited to a certain group of people. It's open to everyone. It opens its heart and it opens its arms and it opens its mind and mouth to those that will come and share with us. They too can have peace. They too can have assurance. They too can have great joy. Let's go into this. I'm not going to read the verses, but verses 43 to 65. But oh, there's some names in there. We won't go through the names. But 43 to 65 is very, very interesting. They're not even of Jewish heritage. They are Gentiles. Again, it's a reflection of the heart of God. They are servants. We would call them today slaves. The fascinating thing I find with this is that even Israel, when she's in a land that is separate from theirs, in the land of Babylon, their servants, their slaves, would rather follow them back to Jerusalem than have the option of staying free in Babylon. What does that tell us about their relationship with people? What does it tell us? So very often when my dad used to say to me, "Oh, go to bed the wrong way today, wrong side of the bed today," he said. And we never allowed to do that. That was a no-no. If I got up in a mood, I can picture my dad saying to me now, "Hey, listen now. You want to be down in the dumps, get your clothes on, come with me down to Chepstow to the Burns Hospital. Then you'll see what it's like to be down in the dumps." Of course, my dad, when he came out of the war, he had a really nasty shrapnel injury, and so he spent a long, long time recovering with major operations on his eye, face and jaw to recover. And he saw horrendous sights on the war. That the Jewish community must have been one that was quite approachable. It's a picture that's not painted today, is it? They don't help themselves sometimes. But it stands it. And so these Gentile slaves, these servants, they come. Some of them have been so assimilated into Jewish culture that they actually believe that they were priests themselves. They were there to serve in the temple, to help the Levites, who were the powerhouse, the drive machine, in the running day-to-day thing of the temple. When you read the book of Chronicles, you read of 24 divisions that served the Lord, of the Levite tribe, and they would be there for a month. what John the Baptist's father had, that little day that he had. That was a day that not many priests tasted of. There were some priests that were born to serve but never had the opportunity, like that brother did. It was the tribe was that far spread. 24 divisions, so that they would be there, month on month, and you'd serve for a month and then you'd come home. And so these Levites had servants, and these servants assimilated and became so assimilated, became so one that they thought they were priests. But they were not. And this is something we have to learn, see, when we come to Christ. Anybody can come. Anybody can come. But don't pretend to be something you're not. Don't pretend to be something that you are not. There'll be plenty of things to do. There'll be loads of things that we can do together. But don't try to be, as the hymn says, what I think is one of Billy Graham's favourites, I think, just as I am without one plea, that your blood was shed for me, O Lamb of God, I come. Come as you are, see. No need for pretense, no need to make up that you're something this, that, or the other. Come. But the invitation's open to all. Even slaves can come in. Gentile slaves. The gospel opens up. It's a sad reflection, though, on the Levites themselves. We read of the servants, I'm assuming of the servants that were in the temple or would have worked in the temple in former days. There's about nearly 400 of them, if you total up the numbers. Of the Levites, if you total up those, 350. Sometimes, those that you expect to make progress, and those least expected to make progress, do. It's that saying that Jesus said, isn't it? Sometimes the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. The Levites were the powerhouse of the temple. They were the Bible teachers. They were the ones that when they weren't in the temple would go out and about in the days of the great kings of Israel, would go out and about the land teaching the law of God. The nation was so reliant on it. Hezekiah said that it was so important that the people needed to make sacrifice of their own lives. I don't mean sacrifice their lives, but give so that the Levites could do the job that they were called to do. They were so vital to it. Jehoshaphat saw it. Josiah saw it. It was vital that the Levites were working on firing on all pistons. Only 300. Now I don't think just 350 were awakened. But 350 volunteered to come forward to leave Babylon, the comfort of Babylon, and enter into Jerusalem. The Levites outnumbered their brothers quite naturally. Because their brothers, the priests, the sons of Aaron, was a limited part of the tribe. Yet in this account, in Ezra chapter 2, we find that the priests of the sons of Aaron, they number 12 to 1 in comparison to the Levites. They were blood brothers, but the priests, they belonged to the sons of Aaron. But the rest of the tribe of Levi, they were outnumbered 12 to 1. It should never have been like that. But they felt ties back in Babylon, see. They felt tied to that more than the call of God to do what they were called to do. Help us, O Lord, not to be like that. But to try and, as Bethan sang at the end, I want to serve you more. I want to serve you more. Coming to a close then, we enter into the city, and we see that in verse 68 it says this, some of the heads of the families, when they came to the house of the Lord, offered freely for it to be built. There had already been an offering, a freewill offering made in Babylon before they left. When they got to Babylon, when they got to Jerusalem, they passed through the gates that were being burned down, the walls that were scorched. And they walk through and step over the stones, and they come to the place where the house of God used to be, and it's a scattered ruin. Nothing there would tell you that it would have been a temple. And they stand there. And as they see the work that is set before them, reality hit home. Reality hit home. You listen sometimes to people, don't you? And I think, well, you read on the news or sometimes in our own private conversations. I'm thinking, you haven't got a clue. You haven't got no idea. And we wax lyrical sometimes on giving advice. And the person inside that you're speaking to can look at us and say, you have no idea what it's like. Very often when I meet with those that have lost loved ones, I hardly say a word. Because very often what you do, if you try to give advice in the wrong spirit, in the wrong manner, they turn and their eyes will say to you, you've got no idea what it's like. So sometimes it's just sit quiet. And I give the most vain of advice sometimes. You know, if you want noise in the home, when you go out, leave the TV on or leave the radio on, so that when you come in, there's noise in the home. And different bits and pieces like that. But as to regards of that time of grieving, I have no experience of that. When they are stood there and they see what's set before them, what I think is lovely here, the work doesn't overwhelm them. They're not beaten back thinking, well, what is the point of doing what we're trying to do? Do you know what they did? It says they offered freely. They dug into their pockets again. They weren't overawed by it all. They saw that the work was something that they could have, and so they dug into their pockets. So again, this is not an appeal for money on your behalf to prove that you're going on with God. The church is fine financially. We thank God for it. So please don't think I'm doing that. I'm just telling you what these people went through. That the work before them was there, and they dug into their pockets and they said, let's get on with this work. But they allowed a little time for people to establish themselves. And so the priests and the Levites and the Nethinim and the different ones went to their homes. All Israel, it says, went to their homes. That tells us that representatives of the 12 tribes were there. They're not all lost. They were there. Some of them were there. And they went. And then it says in chapter 3, verse 1, after a little time of establishing themselves, in the 7th month, they left their homes. And the people of Israel gathered together as one man in Jerusalem. Jesus speaks to me sometimes about counting the cost. And sometimes we make decisions. When you read through the book of the law, there are times when the Lord tells us about making vows, that you mustn't be rash in this. You can't just act on the heat of the moment. You've got to sit down and think about these things. And so there's opportunities in certain circumstances where people are able to reflect about a vow. And the Lord says, well, if you're going to do something with me and for me, then sit down and count the cost. Think about it. Don't just make a rash decision. These people had time to forget about it. Something very important. They now had a home. And they could center their minds on the home. And when you center your minds upon the home sometimes, we can forget about serving the Lord. But these, they come together and gather as one man. Do you know what the Lord's promise to them was? I will gather you up. I will be your rear guard. And here he is, look. They gathered up as one man, of one heart, of one accord, in one place. And the work is about to begin. Feel the joy that they must have felt within their soul at this moment. We've come this far. We've done what we said we were going to do. Let's go up, and we've arrived. Now let the work begin. God willing, next week we'll start looking at the work itself. But may God grant to us a freedom like they had, of worship and of service, of lovingly following him, knowing him, loving him and serving him. May God grant it. Well, time is gone.